The scream cut through the autumn morning like broken glass, high, desperate, raw with terror that only a child in mortal panic can produce. Jack, Reaper. Sullivan was halfway through his second cup of black coffee, standing in his kitchen wearing nothing but faded jeans and a Marine Corps tattoo that stretched across his scarred back, when the pounding started. Not a polite knock, not even an urgent rap. This was the sound of small fists hammering against worn wood with the kind of desperation that makes your blood run cold before your brain fully processes what's happening. He crossed the living room in 4 strides, unlocked the deadbolt and yanked the door open. Standing on his porch was a boy, maybe 8 years old, barefoot on cold concrete, his small chest heaving with sobs that shook his entire frame. The kid's Spider-Man pajamas were singed black at the edges, curling away from the fabric like paper held too close to flame. His hands were blistered red and raw, and his face was streaked with soot and tears that carved clean lines through the ash. "Please," the boy choked out between gasps that sounded like drowning. "My mom's still inside. She won't come out. She locked the door and she won't answer, and the smoke—" His voice cracked completely, dissolving into a wail that hit Jack somewhere deep in his chest, in that place where old promises lived and died. Jack looked past the boy's shoulder. 3 houses down, thick black smoke poured from a second-story window like a demon's breath, rolling out in heavy clouds that blotted out the pale morning sky. Orange flames licked at the roofline, hungry and growing, eating through shingles and wood with the kind of speed that told Jack this fire had been burning for a while before anyone noticed. The neighborhood was still asleep. No sirens wailing in the distance yet, no neighbors running out with garden hoses or fire extinguishers. Just the boy, the smoke billowing into the grey dawn, and a silence that felt deeply, terribly wrong. Jack didn't think, didn't calculate odds, or consider consequences. He grabbed his leather vest from the hook by the door, jammed his feet into unlaced boots, and ran. Behind him, he heard the boy's bare feet slapping against pavement as the kid struggled to keep up, gasping for air that tasted like ash and fear. If you're watching this, buckle up, because what happens next will restore your faith in strangers who act when everyone else freezes. This is the story of one desperate knock, one burning house, and one promise that would change 3 lives forever. Jack reached the burning house in under 30 seconds, his lungs already burning from the sprint, his mind automatically cataloguing details, the way his Marine training had taught him 15 years ago, in places where hesitation meant death. The front door hung open like a screaming mouth, and smoke billowed out in thick grey-black waves that tasted like burning plastic, scorched wood, and something chemical that made his eyes water immediately. The heat radiating from inside hit him like a physical force, pushing back against his chest. "Where is she?" Jack barked, grabbing the boy's shoulders to stop him from running toward the flames. The kid was shaking so hard his teeth chattered despite the heat. "Upstairs! Her bedroom! She locked the door from inside!" The boy's voice was climbing toward hysteria. "I tried to get her to come out, but she wouldn't answer, and then the smoke got too thick and I couldn't breathe and—" "Hey!" Jack gave him a firm shake, forcing the boy to focus on his eyes instead of the nightmare unfolding behind them. "Listen to me. What's your name?" Tommy. "Tommy, I'm Jack. I'm going to get your mom out, but I need you to do exactly what I say. You understand." Tommy nodded frantically, tears cutting fresh tracks through the soot on his face. "Good. Now run to that house across the street. See the blue one? Bang on the door and tell them to call 911. Tell them there's a woman trapped on the 2nd floor. Can you do that?" "But my mom!" "I've got your mom. You get help. Go. Now." Tommy hesitated for one agonizing second, then turned and ran, his bare feet flying across the street. Jack watched just long enough to see a porch light flick on. Then he yanked his bandana up over his nose and mouth and plunged into the burning house. The heat inside was staggering. It pressed against him from all sides like being shoved into an oven, and the smoke was so thick he could barely see 3 feet ahead. His eyes immediately started streaming, and every breath through the bandana tasted like poison. He'd seen fire before, too many times, in too many places that haunted his dreams. In Afghanistan, buildings didn't just burn. They collapsed suddenly. They exploded without warning. They swallowed men whole and left nothing but ash and dog tags. But this wasn't Helmand Province. This was a residential street in Ashford, Pennsylvania, early on a Tuesday morning, and a woman was trapped somewhere in this inferno. Jack found the staircase by memory more than sight, his hands running along the wall to guide him through the smoke. The stairs were still structurally intact, but flames crawled along the ceiling above them like angry fingers reaching down, trying to grab something to pull into hell. The wallpaper was peeling away in long strips, curling and blackening. The heat intensified with every step upward, and Jack could feel it cooking his exposed skin, could smell his own hair starting to singe. The second-floor hallway was an oven. Paint bubbled and ran down the walls like melted wax. The carpet beneath his boots was smouldering, and the air shimmered with waves of heat that distorted everything into a nightmare landscape. Jack squinted through the smoke, trying to orient himself, trying to remember which door Tommy had said. There were 4 doors in the hallway. 3 stood open. 1 was closed. He stumbled toward it, his lungs screaming for clean air. "Ma'am!" he roared, his voice raw and harsh. "Open the door!" "We need to go now." No response, just the roar of fire consuming everything around him, timber cracking overhead, glass shattering somewhere below. Jack stepped back and slammed his shoulder into the door. Pain exploded through his joint, but the door didn't budge. He kicked it, putting all his weight behind the blow, once, twice. On the 3rd kick he heard wood splinter. On the 4th, the frame gave way completely, and the door burst inward with a crack like a gunshot. Inside, a woman sat on the edge of a queen-sized bed, hands folded neatly in her lap, staring at the floor. She wasn't coughing, wasn't crying, wasn't even moving, just sitting there in a white nightgown while the world burned around her, while smoke filled the room and flames consumed the hallway behind Jack. Her long, dark hair hung loose around her face, and her skin was pale, almost grey in the hellish orange light filtering through the smoke. "Lady, we gotta go!" Jack grabbed her arm, expecting resistance, expecting her to jerk away or fight him. But she didn't resist at all, didn't even look at him. Her skin was cool despite the inferno, her eyes distant and unfocused. She was somewhere else entirely, locked inside her own head, unreachable. Shock, Jack realized with a sick feeling in his gut. Deep, traumatic, paralytic shock. She'd given up. She was just sitting here waiting for the fire to take her. He didn't have time to be gentle. Jack scooped her up in a fireman's carry, her weight slight against his shoulders, and turned back toward the hallway. The ceiling groaned overhead. Somewhere deeper in the house, something collapsed with a sound like thunder. Jack ran for the stairs, praying they'd hold long enough to get them both out alive. By the time Jack stumbled out the front door with the woman in his arms, his lungs were on fire and his vision was tunneling, darkness creeping in at the edges. His legs nearly gave out on the front lawn, but he managed to lower the woman onto the grass before collapsing beside her, gasping for air that felt like broken glass going down his throat. Every breath was agony. Every cough brought up black spit that tasted like chemicals and death. Fire trucks were screaming down the street now, their sirens splitting the morning air, red and white lights painting the neighborhood in strobing colors. Neighbors poured out of houses in bathrobes and pajamas, phones out, mouths hanging open in shock as they watched flames engulf the 2-story colonial. The boy, Tommy, sprinted across the street the second he saw Jack emerge, his small body launching forward with single-minded desperation. "Mom! Mom!" Tommy crashed to his knees beside the woman. his hands hovering over her face like he was afraid to touch her, afraid she might shatter like glass. "Please wake up, please, please." The woman's eyes fluttered. She blinked once, slowly, like someone waking from a very long sleep, then twice. Her gaze found Tommy's face, and something behind her eyes finally cracked open. The distance disappeared. Reality crashed back in. She grabbed her son and pulled him against her chest, burying her face in his hair and weeping, deep, racking sobs that shook her entire body. Tommy wrapped his arms around her neck and cried into her shoulder, both of them clinging to each other like survivors of a shipwreck. Paramedics swarmed the scene within seconds. One of them, a young woman with kind eyes and quick hands, crouched beside Jack and shined a penlight in his eyes, checking his pupils. "Sir, I need you to stay still. You've got significant smoke inhalation. We need to get you on oxygen." "I'm fine," Jack rasped, his voice barely recognizable. "Check her." He nodded toward the woman. "We've got 4 units here, sir. Someone's already on her. But you need medical attention, too." Jack waved her off and tried to stand. His legs wobbled like a newborn calf's, and the paramedic had to catch him before he fell. "Stubborn," she muttered, but there was a smile in her voice. "At least let me get you oxygen while you sit here being heroic." She fitted a mask over his face, and Jack breathed in clean, cool air that felt like salvation. The darkness at the edges of his vision receded slowly. Across the lawn, 2 other paramedics were checking the woman. Claire, he heard someone call her, taking her vitals, asking questions in calm, professional voices. Tommy refused to let go of her hand. She kept squeezing back, tears still streaming down her face, like she couldn't quite believe they were both still breathing. A firefighter approached Jack, late 50s, weathered face carved with deep lines, scarred hands that had seen decades of this work. His turnout gear was streaked with ash, and his helmet bore the shield of Ashford Fire Department Engine Company 3. His name tag read, "Captain Hollis. You the one who pulled her out?" Hollis's voice was gravel and smoke. Jack pulled the oxygen mask away from his face long enough to nod. Hollis studied him with eyes that had seen too much death and just enough miracles to keep going. "You military? Marines? 2 tours, Helmand Province. Thought so. Only jarheads are dumb enough to run into a burning building without gear." But there was respect in his voice, not criticism. Hollis looked back at the house, where his crew was directing heavy streams of water at the flames. "You know what you just walked into? A fire," Jack said flatly. "A death trap." Hollis's voice dropped lower. "Another 3 minutes and that staircase would have collapsed. The 2nd floor was about to come down. You got lucky, Marine. You both got lucky." Jack pulled the mask away again. "Didn't feel like luck." Hollis crouched down to Jack's level, his knees popping with the motion. "That woman you pulled out, her name's Claire Donovan. Lost her husband 6 months ago. Car accident. Drunk driver ran a red light and T-boned him at an intersection 3 miles from here. She's been struggling since. Neighbors say she stopped leaving the house, except to take the kid to school. Stopped answering phone calls, stopped going to church. Some folks were worried, but nobody knew what to do about it." Jack's stomach turned to ice. "You're saying she—" "I'm saying Fire Marshal will investigate, but between you and me." Hollis's eyes were hard, but not unkind. "Electrical fires don't usually start in locked bedrooms at 6 in the morning, and people in shock don't usually lock themselves in and sit down to wait." Jack looked across the lawn at Claire, who was now sitting up with an oxygen mask over her face, one arm wrapped around Tommy while paramedics worked. The boy had his head on her shoulder, his eyes squeezed shut. She was stroking his hair, whispering something Jack couldn't hear. "But that kid," Hollis continued, following Jack's gaze, "that boy ran for help when his whole world was burning down. He didn't freeze. He didn't panic and run away. He found the bravest thing he could do, and he did it." Hollis straightened up with a grunt. "You saved someone who might not have wanted saving, Marine. But her kid, you gave him his mother back. That counts for something." Jack didn't know what to say to that. So he just put the oxygen mask back on and watched as paramedics loaded Claire onto a stretcher, Tommy walking beside her, refusing to let go of her hand. She squeezed back every few seconds, like she was reminding herself he was real, that they were both still here. Maybe Hollis was right. Maybe she hadn't wanted saving, but the kid had wanted his mom. And sometimes, Jack thought, that was enough. Jack went home 3 hours later, after the paramedics had checked him over one final time and reluctantly cleared him to leave. He showered the smoke off his skin, standing under water as hot as he could stand, until the bathroom filled with steam and the smell of ash finally washed away down the drain. His shoulder throbbed where he'd slammed it into Claire's bedroom door. His lungs still burned with every deep breath, but he'd had worse. He'd survived worse. He tried to forget about it, tried to push the image of Claire sitting on that bed out of his mind, tried not to think about what might have happened if Tommy hadn't come pounding on his door. Jack had learned long ago that dwelling on close calls was a fast road to madness. You did what you could. You saved who you could save. And you didn't torture yourself over the ones who slipped through your fingers, but the image of that boy's face, tear-streaked and terrified, small fists hammering on wood, that image wouldn't leave him alone. 3 days later, his phone rang. Unknown number. Jack almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Is this Jack Sullivan?" A woman's voice, soft but steady, with an underlying strength that reminded him of steel wrapped in silk. "Yeah. Who's this?" "This is Claire Donovan. I don't know if you remember me." Jack sat up straight on his couch, the beer in his hand forgotten. "I remember." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion, barely held in check. "I need to say thank you, and I need to say I'm sorry, and I don't know which one to start with." "You don't owe me either one," Jack said quietly. "I do." She took a shaky breath that crackled through the phone speaker. "Mr. Sullivan, Jack, I need you to understand something. When you broke down my door and found me sitting there, I was going to let it happen. The fire. I'd started it myself, knocked over a candle near the curtains and just watched it spread. I thought Tommy was at his friend's house for a sleepover. I thought he'd be safe. I thought he'd be better off without a mother who couldn't get out of bed most days, who couldn't stop crying, who couldn't be the person she used to be before." Her voice broke completely. Jack heard her crying, heard her trying to pull herself together. "But Tommy's friend got sick," she continued, words tumbling out now like a dam breaking. "They called at 5 in the morning to bring him home early. I didn't even hear the phone. He let himself in with his key and went straight to bed. And when he smelled the smoke," she sobbed, "he tried to get me out. He banged on my door and screamed, and I heard him, but I couldn't. I couldn't move. I couldn't make myself care. And then he ran. He ran to find help, and he found you." Jack's throat tightened until he could barely breathe. "When I woke up on that grass," Claire whispered, "and saw his face, saw how terrified he was, how much he needed me, I realized what I'd almost done. I realized I was about to destroy him in a way that would never heal. My husband's death broke something in me, but if I'd gone through with it, if you hadn't been there—" She couldn't finish. "You getting help?" Jack asked, his voice rougher than he intended. "I am. I checked into a program the next day. Inpatient therapy, grief counseling, all of it. Tommy's staying with my sister while I'm there, but I talk to him every night. And every night he asks about you. Asks if you're okay, if your lungs are better, if you're still riding your motorcycle. He talks about you like you're a superhero, Jack." Despite everything, Jack felt the corner of his mouth twitch. "I'm not. To him you are. To me you are." Her voice steadied. "You didn't just save my life. You reminded me that someone still cared enough to run into the fire. That I still mattered enough for a stranger to risk everything. And that changed something. It broke through whatever darkness I was drowning in." Jack didn't know what to say. He'd spent 15 years trying to save people, in combat zones, in bar fights, on dark roads where cars had wrapped around telephone poles. He'd saved some, lost more, and he'd learned not to expect gratitude because gratitude didn't bring back the ones who didn't make it, but this felt different. "Tommy wants to meet you again," Claire said, "properly, not in the middle of a crisis. He wants to say thank you, and She paused. "I'd like that too, if you're willing." Jack thought about all the brothers he'd lost overseas, all the promises made in blood and broken by bullets, all the lives that had slipped through his fingers despite everything he'd done to hold on, all the nights he'd stayed awake wondering if he could have moved faster, aimed better, tried harder. But this one he'd caught. "Tell him I'd like that," Jack said, watching from Ashford, Pennsylvania at 7:23 p.m. and already knowing this story is about to get even bigger. "Drop a comment with your city and the time right now. Let's see how far this reaches." 2 weeks later, Jack pulled his Harley into the parking lot of Rosie's Diner, a small chrome and neon place on the edge of town that looked like it had been frozen in 1957 and never bothered to thaw out. Claire and Tommy were already there, waiting in a red vinyl booth by the window that looked out over the parking lot. Tommy saw him first through the glass, saw the big motorcycle roll to a stop, saw the bearded man in leather swing his leg over the seat, and the boy nearly launched himself out of the booth. Jack had barely pushed through the front door when Tommy barreled into him, wrapping his arms around Jack's waist and squeezing hard enough to make breathing difficult. "You're here. You're really here. I told Mom you'd come, but I wasn't totally sure, and—" "Easy, kid," Jack said. But he was smiling despite himself. He put one hand on top of Tommy's head, ruffling the boy's hair. "You gonna let me breathe?" Tommy stepped back, grinning so wide it looked like his face might split in half. "Sorry, I'm just really glad you're okay. Mom said your lungs got hurt from all the smoke, and I was worried you might be sick forever." "Takes more than a little smoke to kill a Marine." Claire stood and extended her hand, and Jack shook it. She looked completely different from the hollow-eyed ghost he'd carried out of that burning house. There was color in her cheeks now, light behind her eyes. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she wore jeans and a soft blue sweater that made her look younger, more alive. "Thank you for coming, Jack. I know you didn't have to. Kid wouldn't stop asking, would he?" She smiled, and it was genuine. Not once. He's been counting down the days. They slid into the booth, Jack on one side, Claire and Tommy on the other. A waitress appeared with menus and coffee, and they ordered food, burgers and fries for everyone. A chocolate milkshake for Tommy that came in a tall glass with whipped cream piled high enough to require engineering knowledge to consume. Tommy talked like someone had removed his internal pause button. He asked questions about motorcycles. What kind Jack rode, how fast it could go, whether he'd ever crashed, yes, twice, and yes, it hurt. He asked about the Marines, what Jack had done, where he'd been deployed, whether he'd ever been in a real firefight. Jack kept those answers vague and age-appropriate. He asked about being a hero, what it felt like to save someone's life, whether Jack had saved lots of people. Jack deflected most of it, uncomfortable with the hero worship he could see building in the kid's eyes. Heroes, in Jack's experience, were usually just people who'd survived situations where others hadn't. There was luck involved, timing, chance, nothing noble about it. But Tommy was persistent in the way only an 8-year-old on a mission could be. "Why'd you help us?" Tommy finally asked, setting down his milkshake and looking at Jack with sudden seriousness that seemed far too old for his face. "You didn't know us. You could have just called 911 and stayed safe, but you ran into the fire. Why?" Jack set down his coffee mug and met the boy's eyes. "Because you asked." "That's it? That's it." Tommy frowned, processing this. "But lots of people ask for help, and nobody comes. My dad used to say that most people don't help because they think someone else will do it. He said the world runs on people assuming someone else will step up, but you didn't wait for someone else. Jack glanced at Claire. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Gratitude and pain and something else mixed together. Something that looked like hope trying to push through grief. "Your dad was right," Jack said quietly. "Waiting gets people killed. I've seen it happen too many times. Someone needs help. Everyone stands around looking at each other, waiting for someone else to move first. And by the time anyone does, it's too late." He paused. "I learned a long time ago that if you see someone drowning, you don't wait to see if a lifeguard shows up. You jump in." Tommy nodded slowly, absorbing this like he was committing it to memory. Then, out of nowhere, he asked, "Do you think my mom's going to be okay?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Claire's breath caught, and her hand tightened around her coffee cup until her knuckles went white. Jack didn't sugarcoat it, didn't feed the kid false promises or empty reassurances. "I think she's fighting. And fighting's what matters. She's not giving up. And that means she's already winning." Tommy reached across the table and took his mother's hand, his small fingers wrapping around hers. "I'll help her fight." Claire's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. A real smile that reached all the way to her eyes and made her look like the person she must have been before tragedy tried to break her. "I know you will, baby. You already are." They stayed for 2 hours, long after the food was gone and the coffee had gone cold. Tommy showed Jack drawings he'd made, pictures of firefighters and motorcycles, and a stick figure labeled Reaper, pulling another stick figure labeled Mom out of a burning house. Claire talked about the therapy program, about learning to live with grief instead of being crushed by it. About small victories like getting out of bed without crying or making it through dinner without breaking down. And Jack, who usually kept people at arm's length, who'd learned in war zones that caring too much was a liability, found himself caring anyway. A month passed and Jack settled back into his routine, working at Dutch's auto repair during the day, riding with the Iron Ghosts on weekends, keeping his head down and his hands busy. But Tommy kept calling. At first it was once a week, Claire apologizing each time for bothering him. Then it was twice a week. Then almost daily, until Jack started expecting the kid's voice on the other end of the line, the way some people expected the sunrise. "Can I come see your bike sometime? Can you teach me how engines work? Can I meet your biker friends?" Claire apologized every time, but Jack didn't mind. The truth was, he'd spent 15 years surrounded by ghosts, dead Marines whose faces he couldn't forget, mistakes that played on loop in his dreams, a growing certainty that maybe he'd used up all his second chances somewhere in the desert. But Tommy was different. The kid had fire in him, the kind that didn't come from anger or pain, but from hope. And hope was rare enough that Jack figured it deserved protecting, even if he'd long since given up on finding any for himself. So one Saturday morning in late November, with frost still clinging to the grass and his breath coming out in white clouds, Jack called Claire back and invited them to the garage. They arrived around 10, Tommy practically vibrating with excitement as they walked up the gravel driveway to Dutch's place, a converted warehouse with high ceilings, oil-stained concrete floors, and the permanent smell of gasoline and metal that Jack had come to think of as home. The main bay was filled with motorcycles in various states of repair, choppers with extended forks, vintage Harleys with chrome that caught the light like mirrors, cruisers with custom paint jobs that cost more than some people's cars. Tommy's eyes went wide the second he stepped through the bay doors. "Whoa," he whispered, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "This is the coolest place I've ever seen." Jack's crew was already there, working on their bikes or just hanging around shooting the shit the way they did most Saturdays. Bone was the first to notice the visitors, a 6'5" wall of muscle with a beard like a Viking and arms covered in tattoos that told stories in ink. He straightened up from the softdale he'd been working on and wiped his hands on a rag. "This the kid." Bone's voice was a rumble like distant thunder. "That's him," Jack confirmed. "Get Tommy, this is Bone. Don't let him scare you. He's mostly harmless." "Mostly," Bone agreed with a grin that showed a gold tooth. He crouched down to Tommy's level, which still left him at eye height with the boy. "Heard you saved your mom, little man." Tommy shook his head quickly. "Reaper saved her. I just got help." "Nah," Bone said, his voice dropping to something almost gentle. "You ran for help. You didn't freeze up. You didn't hide under your bed or panic. You saw your mom needed saving, and you acted. That takes guts." He tapped Tommy's chest lightly, with one massive finger. "That's what separates the men from the boys, you know, knowing when to move." Tommy's chest puffed up a little, pride mixing with embarrassment on his face. Wrench wandered over next, the club's mechanic, a wiry guy in his 40s with grease permanently embedded under his fingernails and an encyclopedic knowledge of anything with an engine. "You like bikes, kid?" "I love them," Tommy breathed. "Good answer. Come here, let me show you something." Wrench led Tommy over to a partially disassembled Road King and started pointing out parts, explaining in simple terms how the engine worked, how the transmission connected to the wheels, how everything fit together like a mechanical puzzle. Tommy listened with the kind of rapt attention usually reserved for favorite bedtime stories. Lily emerged from the back office, the club's only female member and possibly the toughest person Jack had ever met. Her arms were sleeved in intricate tattoos, her dark hair was buzzed short on one side, and her eyes were sharp enough to cut glass. She handed Tommy a clean rag without saying a word. "What's this for?" Tommy asked. "Chrome doesn't clean itself," Lily said. "Come on, I'll teach you the most important skill in life." For the next 3 hours, Tommy was in absolute heaven. He helped Wrench tighten bolts on the Road King, learned how to check tire pressure from Bone, and spent 20 minutes carefully polishing chrome under Lily's critical eye until it reflected like a mirror. Jack showed him the basics of his own bike, a 1998 Harley Dyna lowrider that he'd rebuilt from scrap over 2 years, and even let him sit on it with strict instructions not to touch any controls. "It's so heavy," Tommy marveled, his hands gripping the handlebars like he was holding something sacred. "Weighs about 650, Jack said. "That's why you don't drop it." "Have you ever dropped it?" "Twice. Both times hurt." Claire watched from the bay door, arms crossed against the November chill, a soft smile on her face. Jack walked over after making sure Tommy was safely occupied arguing with Bone about whether Batman could beat Superman in a motorcycle race. "He's happy," Claire said quietly. "He's a good kid. He hasn't smiled this much since—" She stopped herself, but Jack understood. Since her husband died, since the world fell apart. "He needed this," Jack said. "Somewhere to belong. People who give a damn." "It's more than that." Claire turned to face him fully, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You gave him a reason to believe people still show up when it matters. That promises mean something, that the world isn't just—" She gestured vaguely, "empty." Jack didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and watched Tommy laugh at something Wrench said, the boy's whole face lighting up with joy that seemed impossible just a month ago. Sometimes, Jack thought, saving someone's life was the easy part. Helping them find reasons to keep living, that was the real work. And maybe, just maybe, he was starting to figure out how to do it. Winter came fast that year, arriving like an unwelcome guest who showed up early and refused to leave. Snow dusted the streets of Ashford by early December, and the cold settled into bones and joints like an old wound that never quite healed. Jack barely noticed. He'd spent enough winters in worse places that Pennsylvania cold felt mild, but he did notice when Claire mentioned, almost casually during one of Tommy's phone calls, that the boy's 9th birthday was coming up. "December 20th, she said, her voice carrying that particular tone people use when they're trying to sound casual about something that clearly isn't. "Nothing big, just cake and a movie at home. His dad used to make a huge deal out of birthdays, parties, decorations, the works, but I don't know how to do it without him. I don't know how to make it special." Jack heard what she wasn't saying. "I don't know how to give my son joy when I'm still learning how to feel it myself." He hung up and stared at his phone for a long moment. Then he made a call. "Bone, we riding next Saturday." "Was planning on it, why?" "Change of plans, we're making a stop first." 2 days later, on a Saturday morning, when the temperature hovered just above freezing and the sky was the color of old steel, the rumble started, low and distant at first, like thunder rolling in from far away, then growing louder, closer, unmistakable. The deep bass throb of 17 V-twin engines firing in sequence, a symphony of power and chrome and controlled chaos. Claire and Tommy were in the kitchen finishing breakfast when the sound shook the windows. Coffee sloshed in Claire's mug. Tommy's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "What is that?" the boy whispered. The rumble grew louder, deeper, until it felt less like sound and more like a physical presence pressing against the walls. Tommy abandoned his pancakes and sprinted to the front window, pressing his face against the glass. His breath fogged the pain as he stared out at the street. 17 motorcycles lined both sides of the road in perfect formation. 17 riders in black leather vests with patches that read "Iron Ghosts MC" sat astride machines that gleamed even in the grey winter light. Chrome pipes, custom paint, decades of road miles and brotherhood forged in oil and gasoline. Engines idled in rough unison, creating a mechanical heartbeat that you felt in your chest as much as heard with your ears. Jack stood at the front of the formation, helmet under one arm, his diner looking like exactly what it was, a weapon that happened to have wheels. Tommy's mouth fell open so wide Claire worried his jaw might actually unhinge. Jack walked up the driveway with the casual confidence of a man who'd done this 1,000 times. He knocked once, then pushed the door open when Claire appeared. "Happy birthday, kid." Tommy couldn't speak. He just stood there, eyes the size of dinner plates, looking from Jack to the motorcycles and back again, like he couldn't quite process what he was seeing. You brought your whole crew," Tommy finally managed. "Not the whole crew, just the ones who wanted to meet you." Jack grinned. "Turns out that's all of them." Bone stepped forward carrying a wrapped box about the size of a shoebox. "From all of us, little man." Tommy took the box with trembling hands and tore into the wrapping paper with the single-minded intensity of a kid on Christmas morning. Inside was a leather vest, child-sized but clearly custom-made, black leather with careful stitching and attention to detail. On the back, professionally embroidered in gold thread, was a patch that made Tommy's breath catch. Tommy Firestarter, Donovan Honorary Iron Ghost. The boy's eyes filled with tears. Not sad tears, not scared tears, but the kind that came from too much feeling all at once, from emotions too big for a 9-year-old body to contain. "You're one of us now," Lily said, stepping up beside Bone. "That patch means something. It means you're family. It means we've got your back no matter what." Tommy looked up at his mother, who had her hand pressed over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "Can I put it on?" "Yes, baby, yes you can." Tommy pulled the vest on over his winter coat. It fit perfectly, like it had been made specifically for him, which it had. Wrench had spent 3 evenings in his garage workshop getting the measurements right, stitching the patch himself, because some things you didn't trust to strangers. Jack knelt down to Tommy's level. "You know why we call you Firestarter?" Tommy shook his head, unable to speak. "Because you ran into the fire to save someone you love. That's what we do. That's who we are. We're the people who move when everyone else freezes. We're the people who show up." He tapped the patch on Tommy's chest. You earned this, kid. You earned it the day you came pounding on my door looking for help. Tommy threw his arms around Jack's neck and hugged him so hard, Jack thought the kid might crack a rib. Over the boy's shoulder, Jack saw Claire crying openly now. One hand pressed to her heart, like she was trying to hold something together that threatened to break apart. "You want to go for a ride?" Jack asked when Tommy finally let go. The boy's eyes went wide. "Really? Lily's got an extra seat. You're going to ride with her while we do a loop around town. Sound good?" Tommy looked at his mother for permission. Claire wiped her eyes and nodded, smiling through tears. The Iron Ghosts took them riding. Not far, just a slow cruise through downtown Ashford, 17 motorcycles rolling in tight formation with a 9-year-old boy sitting proud on the back of Lily's custom Softdale, his new vest buttoned tight against the winter cold. Neighbors came out to watch. Some waved, some smiled, some just stared, not quite understanding what they were seeing but sensing it was important. For Tommy, it was the best birthday of his life. If this story hit you right in the heart, smash that like button. Let's make sure stories like this reach the people who need to see them most. Spring arrived quietly that year, the way it often does in Pennsylvania. Winter holding on with frozen fingers until suddenly one morning you wake up and the world has turned green when you weren't looking. The snow melted, the roads cleared, and life moved forward the way it always did. Steady, unforgiving, relentless. Jack hadn't seen Tommy in a few weeks. The kid had school. Claire had picked up extra shifts at the hospital where she worked as a medical records clerk, and Jack had his own ghosts to manage, his own demons to keep at bay. Then the letter came. It arrived on a Tuesday, mixed in with the usual junk mail and bills. A simple white envelope with careful handwriting on the front, the kind of script that took time and effort, that meant something. No return address, but Jack recognized Claire's handwriting from the thank you card she'd sent after Tommy's birthday. He opened it, standing in his kitchen, coffee going cold on the counter. "Dear Jack, I don't know if you'll read this all the way through, but I needed to write it anyway. There are things I need to say that I can't seem to get out when we talk on the phone or meet in person. Things I need you to understand. When you pulled me out of that fire, I was already gone. Not physically. My heart was still beating, my lungs were still drawing breath, but inside, where it matters, I'd already died. I'd convinced myself that my son would be better off without a mother who couldn't get out of bed most mornings, who couldn't stop crying at random moments, who couldn't be the person she used to be, the person she was supposed to be. I told myself I was doing Tommy a favor, that growing up with a broken mother would damage him more than losing me. I told myself he'd be fine, that my sister would raise him better than I could. I believed it so completely that I didn't even feel guilty when I knocked that candle over. I just felt relief, like I was finally allowed to stop fighting. But you didn't just save my life that day, Jack. You reminded me that someone still cared enough to run into the fire. You showed me that I still mattered enough for a stranger to risk everything. And that changed something fundamental. It broke through whatever darkness I'd been drowning in and forced me to see what I'd almost done. Every day since then, I've been fighting. Some days are harder than others. Some mornings I still can't get out of bed without crying. But I get up anyway, because you showed me that giving up isn't an option when people are counting on you. Tommy talks about you every single day. He wears that vest like armor, like a superhero costume that makes him invincible. He wants to be like you. Brave, steady, someone who shows up when it matters. You've become his North Star, Jack, the example he measures himself against. I'm writing to say thank you, but also to tell you something I think you need to hear. You matter. The things you do matter. The life you saved that day wasn't just mine, it was his too. You gave us both a second chance, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure we don't waste it. With more gratitude than words can express, Jack read it 3 times, standing perfectly still in his kitchen while the coffee went from cold to room temperature. His eyes burned with something that might have been smoke damage from a fire months ago, or might have been something else entirely. He folded the letter carefully, creasing each fold with precision, and tucked it into the inside pocket of his leather vest, right over his heart, where he kept the important things. Where he'd once kept a photo of his Marine squad, most of them dead now, blown apart by IEDs or shot in firefights or lost to the slower deaths that came after, addiction, suicide, the kind of despair that no amount of therapy could fix. But now he kept Claire's letter there instead, a reminder that sometimes you did save someone. Sometimes your best was actually good enough. Sometimes the person you pulled out of the fire actually wanted to live, actually fought to get better, actually made it mean something. Jack picked up his phone and called her. "Hello." Claire's voice was slightly breathless, like she'd been running. "Got your letter." A pause. "Oh, I wasn't sure if—" "Thank you," Jack said, cutting her off, "for writing it, for saying those things. I meant every word." "I know." Jack stared out his kitchen window at the street where Tommy had come running that morning, barefoot and terrified. "You're doing good, Claire. Keep fighting." "I will." Her voice was steady now, strong. "We both will." After they hung up, Jack pulled the letter out of his vest and read it one more time. Then he tucked it back over his heart and went to work, carrying it with him like a promise, like proof that sometimes the broken things could be put back together if someone cared enough to try. 6 months later, on a humid evening in late August, when the air hung thick and heavy like wet wool, Jack got a call from Bone. "You hear about the fire on Maple Street?" Jack's blood ran cold, his hand tightening around the phone. "When?" "Last night, around 2 in the morning. Family trapped inside. Father, mother, 2 kids. Neighbors tried to help, but the smoke was too thick. The fire spread too fast." Bone paused, and Jack could hear the weight in his silence. "2 kids didn't make it, brother. 10-year-old girl and her 6-year-old brother. Fire department got there in 8 minutes, but it was already too late." Jack closed his eyes. The familiar weight settled onto his shoulders, the one that said, "You can't save them all." The one that had followed him home from Afghanistan and never quite left. 8 minutes. In a fire, 8 minutes might as well be 8 hours. He'd learned that firsthand. "There's a vigil tonight at St. Michael's," Bone continued. "Thought you'd want to know." Jack hung up and stared at his hands. They were steady, rock solid. The same hands that had carried Claire Donovan out of her burning house, the same hands that had pulled wounded Marines from burning vehicles in Helmand Province. They never shook, they never trembled. But inside, where no one could see, Jack was breaking apart the same way he always did when he heard about the ones he hadn't saved. That evening he rode to St. Michael's Church, his diner rumbling through streets painted gold by the setting sun. A crowd had already gathered on the church lawn, candles flickering in the growing darkness, flowers piled near a makeshift memorial, people crying quietly or standing in shocked silence. Faces he didn't recognize, people touched by tragedy in ways that would mark them forever. He parked at the back and stood at the edge of the crowd, watching, staying anonymous. Then he saw them. Tommy. Standing with his mother near the front, both of them holding white candles that cast soft light on their faces. The boy's honorary Iron Ghost's vest was buttoned tight despite the heat, and his face was serious, somber, older than any 9-year-old should have to look. Jack walked over, his boots crunching on gravel. Claire saw him first, and her expression softened with something like relief. "You came," she said quietly. "Always do." Tommy looked up at Jack, and the boy's eyes were red-rimmed, but dry. "Reaper. Did you know them? The kids who died?" "No, but that doesn't mean I don't care." Tommy nodded slowly, processing this. "Do you think they were scared?" "When the fire—" His voice caught. Jack knelt down, bringing himself to eye level with the boy. "Probably. Fire's scary, especially when you're trapped. But I think someone tried to help them. Their parents, maybe neighbors. And I think that matters. But they didn't make it, Tommy said, his voice small and breaking. So what's the point of trying if people still die anyway? The question hung in the humid air between them, heavy with weight that no child should have to carry. Jack took a breath, choosing his words carefully because this moment mattered, because what he said right now might shape how this kid saw the world for the rest of his life. "You can't save everyone," Jack said slowly. "I learned that the hard way. You can do everything right. Move fast. Be brave, risk your own life. And sometimes people still don't make it. Sometimes the fire's too big, or you get there too late, or 100 other things go wrong that are completely out of your control. Then why keep trying? Because you will save someone. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but one day you'll pull someone out, and they'll live because you didn't give up. Because you kept showing up." Jack put his hand on Tommy's shoulder. "You can't stop trying just because you might fail. You can't stop showing up just because it's hard. Because one day you'll be the difference between a family losing someone forever and a kid getting their mom back." He paused, letting that sink in. "Like my mom," Tommy said quietly. "Exactly like your mom." Jack glanced at Claire, who was openly crying now. If I'd stayed home that morning because I was scared of failing, where would she be? Tommy reached into his pocket and pulled out a small plastic firefighter's helmet, the kind you get from a gumball machine for a quarter. He turned it over in his hands, studying it like it held answers. "I'm going to be a firefighter when I grow up, so I can save people too. Even if I can't save everyone, I'll save the ones I can." Jack took the helmet and examined it. Cheap red plastic, not even properly painted, probably cost 25 cents. But in Tommy's hands, in this moment, it represented something more. A promise, a choice, a decision to run toward the fire instead of away from it. "Then you'll be a damn good one," Jack said, handing the helmet back. "The best ones are the people who understand that failure is possible, but show up anyway." They stood together for the rest of the vigil, 3 people bound together by fire and survival, and the shared understanding that the world was full of darkness. But somewhere in that darkness, there were still people willing to strike a match and push it back. Jack was 63 years old, grey threaded through his beard like silver wire, his knees complaining on cold mornings in ways they never used to. The iron ghosts had grown older alongside him. Some had moved to warmer climates where arthritis didn't bite so hard. Some had passed on to whatever waited beyond the last ride. Bone had died 3 years back, massive heart attack in his sleep, gone before anyone could say goodbye. Wrench had retired to Florida. Lily still rode, but slower now, more carefully, age teaching caution that youth had never bothered with. But they still gathered, still met at Dutch's garage on Saturday mornings, still showed up for each other because that's what brothers and sisters did. Even when your bones ached and your hands shook and the road seemed longer than it used to. Jack was elbow deep in his diner's engine, replacing spark plugs that had finally given up after 200,000 miles of loyal service, when he heard boots on concrete behind him. Military-issue boots, by the sound of it, the heavy, deliberate footfalls of someone who'd learned to walk with purpose and never forgotten. "You, Jack Sullivan?" a voice asked. Young, strong, familiar in a way Jack couldn't immediately place. Jack straightened up, wiping grease from his hands with a red shop rag. He turned around and found himself staring at a firefighter in full turnout gear, minus the helmet. The young man was broad-shouldered and solid, maybe 6 feet tall, with dark hair and eyes that held the kind of steady confidence that came from walking into burning buildings and walking back out again. He looked to be in his early 20s, face still unlined by the particular kind of trauma that Jack knew intimately, but there was something in those eyes, something Jack recognized. "Depends who's asking," Jack said carefully. The firefighter grinned, a wide, genuine smile that transformed his entire face, and pulled off his gloves. "It's me, Tommy." Jack's breath caught. He stared for a long moment, his brain trying to reconcile the small 8-year-old boy who'd pounded on his door, crying with this grown man standing before him in firefighter's gear. But the eyes were the same, that fierce determination, that light that refused to go out no matter how dark the world got. "Tommy Donovan?" Jack's voice came out rougher than he intended. "Captain Tommy Donovan now, actually." Tommy's grin widened, pride evident but not arrogant. "Just got promoted last month, youngest captain in Ashford Fire Department history." Jack felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been closed for so long he'd forgotten it was there. "I'll be damned. Wanted you to be the first to know," Tommy said, stepping forward and extending his hand. "Well, first outside my mom and the department. You were there at the beginning of this whole thing. Felt right that you should know." Jack shook his hand. Felt the calluses there, the strength. This wasn't a boy anymore. This was a man who'd found his purpose and seized it with both hands. "Your mom doing okay?" Jack asked. "She's doing great. Really great. Still has hard days sometimes. Still sees her therapist once a month, but she's happy, Jack. She volunteers at a crisis center now, helps people who are where she used to be. Turned her pain into something that helps others." Tommy's voice carried deep respect. "She wanted to be here, but she's working today. She said to tell you thank you. Again. She says it every time your name comes up." Jack didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and gestured toward the coffee pot in the corner. "Coffee? Always." They sat on old milk crates in the garage bay, drinking coffee that was 3 hours past fresh and tasted like motor oil mixed with regret, but neither of them cared. Tommy told stories, fires he'd fought, people he'd saved, the ones who didn't make it, and how he'd learned to carry that weight without letting it crush him. "There was this family last year," Tommy said, staring into his coffee cup. "House fire at 3 in the morning. Just like with my mum. We got there in 6 minutes. 6 minutes, Jack, which is damn good. But the father had already gotten his wife and kids out. He was standing on the lawn holding his daughter when we pulled up, just holding her and crying because everyone was safe." Tommy looked up and his eyes were bright. "And I thought about you, about what you said at that vigil 12 years ago. About how you can't save everyone, but that doesn't mean you stop trying, because one day you'll be the difference." "You've made a difference," Jack said quietly. "More than once, I'd bet." 17 confirmed saves so far. Pulled 17 people out of fires, car accidents, collapsed buildings. 17 people who get to go home to their families because I showed up and didn't quit." Tommy paused. "But you know what the crazy part is? Every single one of them, I think about you, about how you didn't know me or my mom, but you ran into that fire anyway. You set the example, Jack. You showed me what showing up actually looks like." Tommy reached into his gear bag and pulled out a worn leather vest, the same child-sized Iron Ghosts vest Jack and the crew had given him on his 9th birthday. It was creased and faded now, the leather soft from years of handling, the patch on the back still legible. Tommy Firestarter Donovan, Honorary Iron Ghost. "I've carried this everywhere," Tommy said, his voice thick with emotion. "Every call, every fire, every rescue. It reminds me why I do this. It reminds me that someone believed in me when I was just a scared kid who'd almost lost everything." He set the vest on the workbench between them, then reached back into his bag and pulled out something else, a folded piece of paper, edges worn soft from being handled countless times. "And I wanted to give you this." Jack unfolded it carefully. Inside was a photograph. Tommy, in full firefighter gear, standing in front of a house that showed clear signs of recent fire damage, soot-stained, but still standing. In the background, a family stood together on the lawn, alive and whole. Written on the back in Claire's unmistakable handwriting, "He kept his promise, just like you." Jack stared at the photo for a long moment, his throat too tight to speak. 12 years. 12 years since a terrified boy had pounded on his door, since he'd carried a woman out of an inferno, since he'd given a kid a vest and a reason to believe the world still had heroes in it, and that kid had become exactly what he'd promised to become. "Thank you, Jack," Tommy said quietly, "for running into the fire when no one else would, for showing me what courage actually looks like, for giving my mom a reason to keep fighting, for—" His voice broke. "For saving us both." Jack stood and pulled Tommy into a hug, the kind that said everything words couldn't possibly express. The young man hugged back hard, and for just a moment, Jack felt that old familiar ache in his chest ease just slightly. The weight he'd carried for so long, the certainty that he'd never saved enough people, never done enough good to balance the scales. It shifted. Not gone. Probably never gone. But lighter somehow. "You did the hard part, kid," Jack said when they finally pulled apart. "You kept running. You kept fighting. You turned pain into purpose." He tapped Tommy's chest right over his heart. "That's all you. I just opened the door. You did more than that." Tommy's smile was watery but genuine. "You showed me that one person can make a difference, that showing up matters, that promises are worth keeping." Outside, the sound of motorcycle engines rumbled to life. The remaining iron ghosts, rolling in for their weekly gathering. Lily pulled up first on her Softail, dismounting with the careful movements of someone whose body had logged too many miles, but whose spirit refused to quit. Behind her came 3 more riders, younger members who'd joined in recent years, keeping the club alive even as the old guard slowly faded. Tommy walked outside with Jack, watching as the bikers parked their machines in a neat row. Lily saw them and walked over, pulling off her helmet to reveal short grey hair and eyes that still missed nothing. "Who's your friend, Reaper?" she asked. "Remember that kid we gave the honorary vest to? Tommy Donovan?" Lily's eyes widened. "Firestarter, no shit." She looked Tommy up and down, taking in the firefighter gear, the captain's insignia. "You actually did it, kid. You actually became a firefighter. Because of you guys," Tommy said simply. "All of you. You showed me what family looks like, what showing up means." Lily smiled, something she didn't do often, and held out her fist. Tommy bumped it with his own. "We're proud of you, Firestarter," she said. "Keep saving lives." "I will. That's the promise." Jack stood there in the garage doorway as Tommy said his goodbyes, as the young captain climbed into his truck and pulled away with a final wave. The photograph was still in Jack's hand, Claire's words still visible on the back. He kept his promise, just like you. Lily walked over and stood beside him, following his gaze down the street where Tommy's truck had disappeared. "That's a good kid," she said. "That's a good man," Jack corrected, "because of you." Jack shook his head slowly. "Because he chose to be. I just gave him a reason to choose." "That's what we do, isn't it?" Lily's voice was quiet, reflective. "We can't save everyone, can't fix everything, but we can show up. We can be the example. We can give people a reason to believe that showing up matters." Jack thought about all the fires he'd run into, both literal and metaphorical. All the people he'd saved. All the ones he'd lost. All the promises made and kept and broken. All the weight he'd carried for so long, convinced it would eventually crush him. But maybe Lily was right. Maybe it wasn't about saving everyone. Maybe it was about saving the ones you could, and trusting that they'd carry the torch forward, that they'd become the light in someone else's darkness. "Yeah," Jack said finally, tucking the photograph into his vest pocket, right next to Claire's letter from 12 years ago. "That's what we do." The engines rumbled behind them, the sound of brotherhood, of promises kept, of showing up even when the road was hard and the destination uncertain. And somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. Not a warning, but a promise. The sound of someone running toward the fire instead of away from it. The sound of Captain Tommy Firestarter Donovan keeping his word. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If it moved you, hit that subscribe button and join us for more stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Because the world needs more people who run into the fire when everyone else runs away. Be one of them. Show up, keep your promises, and never stop believing that one person can make all the difference.